like, yeah, she fine. Oh, yes, one more time. I'm like, yeah, she fine. Wonder when she'll be mine. You up past, I press rewind just to see that it's one more time, and I got this soul. Sorry, boys, they know us. No one can control.
Traditionally, an assessment is to really take a snapshot of a family, or family interactions, or family communications, and to see really, particularly in these high-risk families, whether what the risks are, and also to see whether the risks can be reduced or minimized, so that children can live more safely with their parents, or if they have been removed from their parents' care, that they can be rehabilitated to their parents' care. We are often asked by courts or social services departments, or both of them, to look at these families and to see, is it possible to determine the risk, and is it possible to help these families also to get better. Now, traditionally, a risk assessment is a snapshot and a bit like a Polaroid photograph, I would say, where you see roughly what the status quo is at the moment. But it doesn't give you much information about a family's or parents' ability to change, to be different, to be less dangerous, to be less abusive, less neglectful. So what we have tried to do is, from the beginning, to do an assessment which also assesses parents' ability to change. And that means that we may have a first meeting where we meet, shall we say, the parents, and where we identify what they regard as their difficulties, but also identify what the state or social services or the courts regard as something that needs to be changed. And then, in order to test their ability to change, we put in massive interventions in a very short time frame. So without therapeutic intervention, it's very difficult to assess a family's ability to change. And if we have to comment on can a family change, we do need to actually test this.
So I would see the difference between when you do what would be mere assessment and therapeutic assessment by what?
A mere assessment in my mind doesn't exist. A mere assessment is just maybe a one-off snapshot, but it doesn't give you the information that the courts, that social services need to know in order to make decisions about how can they act from now onwards. What should happen to the kids.
What I see the difference between what you do?
And the difference between that, the one-off snapshot, and what we do is a dynamic, a making almost of a film of how a family in different situations can manage, and how by getting advice, therapeutic intervention, by increasing their ability to mentalize, how they can interact differently and less dangerously and less abusively. So after the first maybe one or two sessions where we do with a snapshot of the family, we then have a series of meetings, sessions, and these can be in the family's home, often better than in a clinical setting, but it can also be in a clinical setting. They can be in other situations or scenarios where families typically experience difficulties, like in the school setting sometimes, in the public sphere, such as in supermarkets or shopping centers, or when they negotiate public transport because they're neglectful perhaps of their child's safety issues and so on. So there we can observe what happens and ad hoc at that moment intervene and say, get them to reflect on whether it's safe for the child or not, and what might go through a child's mind or through their own mind about the safety or otherwise, or this mental state, the emotional state of a child, and then help them on the hoof, so to speak, ad hoc, to think about how to do things differently. So it's really experimentation with different ways of managing a child, and we seek out deliberately real life contexts in which we do that, rather than to confine ourselves to either the clinic setting or the home setting.
So when did you make this transition?
For the past 10 years.
What sort of actions or what happened?
Okay, so maybe if I wind the clock back 20 years, we were asked to do these traditional assessments, and we realized, my team in London realized, that it was very difficult to make any really good well-based, well-founded recommendations about what should happen next if you just have a snapshot. So we wanted to think is that how do families change? And for us in England, the legal system is quite complicated, and they distinguish between a pure assessment and they don't want to have therapy. So I had to convince and educate judges, together with other colleagues of mine in England, and social workers, to educate them to understand that it would be important for us to be able to do some kind of interventions that would aim at changing families during the process of assessment. That proved difficult at the beginning because there's a lot of resistance. People said, you should just do an assessment. And we said, well, but an assessment of what? How they are now or how they might be, and how they might get there where the state or social service would like them to be. So we, through a process of negotiation, training, and also for us understanding what the dilemmas for courts and social workers were, and in our language, mentalizing their own, let's say, preoccupations and so on, it was possible to come up with a deal or with a project, shall we say, and with contracts that would allow us to do both, to do assessment and therapy. But our therapy starts literally in the first session. We want to test really, have they understood what he's saying? I said, how would you, what you've just, seeing so differently, how might you translate this into action? We would ask the parents in the first meeting, not after 6 months. The time frame that we have to operate in is often no more than 3 months. So we have to make our assessments in that short time, and therefore we put in massive interventions in that short time and are able to make recommendations that courts in 95% of the cases that we work with accept now.
And what is in your mind the evidence that you have better results with therapeutic assessment?
Well, we've done follow-ups on quite a few of those families, and we have seen that the rehabilitation rate and our prediction of risk is much better. Rehabilitation rate means that the kids who've been separated from their parents, social services have been able to make decisions on putting these kids back into families because they could see that these families could change. But also for those families where we felt changes couldn't be made, even in that short time frame, we could make predictions about the likelihood of re-injuries. So we did a follow-up study some years ago where we looked at all those cases that had undergone our therapeutic assessments and where we recommended rehabilitation. And the outcome was very good in that of about 100 children, there was only a re-abuse rate of 1%. But when social services didn't follow our recommendations, namely for the child not to be rehabilitated to their parents because of high risks, and they did so against our recommendations, I think there was a re-injury rate of about 65 or 70%, a very high re-injury rate. So the evidence from that study showed that this type of work has got a very good predictive value and also leads to higher rates of rehabilitation than the standard assessments that are just based often only on historical information. Firstly, we start with a network meeting where we get all the professionals there. We explain to them in the presence of the family, so the family is always present at these meetings, what our model and our work is. We have regular review meetings where we actually report on any changes, right? So instead of writing just one report at the end, 3 months later or 6 months later, every 3 or 4 weeks we have meetings where we report in the presence of the families any progress that's been made and are entirely transparent about our the positive and also the negative impressions, opinions that we've gained. So what they get that they didn't get before and is a continuous updating of the work of work that aims also at helping families to change. So there are changes which is different from other assessments, and one thing that we've observed is that we cannot breathe for referrals from the courts. So many judges say, go to that place, don't go anywhere else, because what they do helps me, the judges say, to make decisions about the future of the children, which are better informed than the decisions that are just made on the standard assessments.
So, just to be very precise, what is it that the judges get for their work from you?
Detailed observation, A, of what actually happens when families are together, because we work in real life situations, A. B, detailed commentary on their ability to take on board interventions that aim to change the families for the better. And 3, a risk assessment analysis plus a detailed recommendation about future therapeutic and other rehabilitative work.
What is the most reasonable criticism that you've met for doing therapeutic assessment?
A typical criticism is that, look here, you've worked with this family only for 3 months, how can you make real predictions about them? You've been asked to do an assessment, you've not been asked to do therapy, we don't want to pay for therapy, you've been employed, you've stepped over the mark. Okay, so we've learned from that we need to be very transparent about what our job, what our preferred job is, and if they don't agree to it, we say is that we are the wrong agency for it. So we have to say is that, well, you know, if that's what you want, we offer. This is it's like a market. This is what we offer in our stall. If you want to buy it, that's fine, so to speak. But otherwise, go somewhere else.
When you do therapeutic assessment, what do you look for in the family that tells you about mentalization?
Okay, so there's a mentalizing means to try to understand the mental states of yourself and of the people, family members. And a mental state is a thought, a feeling, a need, a wish, a desire, a fantasy, an emotion. And the theory behind it is that the more you understand your own and other people's mental states, the better potentially the family relationships can be. We use the term attachment, you know, the closeness, the bonding, the attachment between children and parents and the other way around and so on, gets hugely enhanced by better understanding of mutual mental states. In our work, what we aim is to improve that, because we have learned, and there's plenty of research to support that, that family relationships are better and that the risk of abuse or neglect, child abuse or child neglect, is significantly diminished.
So is there something, do you have an example of what you might be looking for more specifically?
For example, I want to know, let's imagine we have, in the assessment we have gone, shall we say, to a supermarket or to a shopping center, and a child has started screaming really badly, and the parent was at the end of her tether and wanted to hit the child, but it was in public, didn't hit the child, but was denigrating in her language the mother and putting the child down in front of everyone. So here we might want to say, at the moment she was so aroused she couldn't think of anything other than her own distress, and certainly not the child's distress or the child's own mental state. So given that we use audiovisual recordings, videotape or DVDs and so on, we might want to look at that with the mother subsequently when she is less aroused, and get her to put thought bubbles, so to speak, into her child's head. So we show on television where it is, we freeze the frame, and I would say, can you look at your child and what kind of thoughts and feelings did your child have at that point, right? We wind on another 2 or 3 minutes, child cries more. What do you think is happening now? Look at these other people. What do they think or feel when they see that child happening? Look at that mother, which is herself. What do you think are her thoughts and feelings and wishes and desires and so on? So we do an ad hoc retrospective analysis of the mental states of all people concerned. The more this mother can tune into the state of mind of a child, the better the kind of relationships subsequently. But it's ongoing work. It's not a one-off event. It's over time. The therapeutic assessments allow us, based on 2 or 3 examples, to assess the likelihood that this can be continued also later.